The evening sky darkened over San Francisco International Airport as Sarah Chen adjusted her navy blue uniform one last time before boarding Pacific Airlines Flight 247. At 32, she had spent the last decade of her life flying across continents, serving passengers with a smile that never betrayed her exhaustion. Tonight's flight to Tokyo would be no different, or so she thought. The first-class cabin buzzed with the usual pre-flight activities as passengers settled into their expensive leather seats. Sarah moved efficiently through her routine checks, her trained eyes scanning for any potential issues. It was then that she noticed him, Marcus Reynolds, the famous tech billionaire CEO, whose face she had seen countless times on magazine covers and news broadcasts. Unlike his public appearances where he always wore perfectly tailored suits, tonight he looked almost ordinary in dark jeans and a simple black cashmere sweater. There was something different about his expression too, a weariness that makeup artists and photographers couldn't hide under the harsh airplane lighting. "Good evening, Mr. Reynolds," Sarah said professionally, offering him a pre-flight beverage. "Would you like anything before we take off?" Marcus looked up from his phone, his eyes showing surprise at being addressed by name. "Just water, please," he replied quietly, his voice lacking the confidence she had heard in his viral keynote speeches. As Sarah moved through the cabin, she overheard snippets of conversation about a major tech merger that had fallen through earlier that day. The business newspapers had been buzzing about Reynolds Industries' potential acquisition of a rival company for months. Now she understood the heaviness in Marcus's demeanor. The flight was scheduled to depart at 10:30 p.m., but at 10:15, the captain's voice crackled through the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some technical difficulties. Our maintenance team is working to resolve the issue. We apologize for any inconvenience." 1 hour turned into 2, and the first-class cabin grew increasingly restless. Several passengers made demanding phone calls or complained loudly about missed connections. But Sarah noticed that Marcus remained unusually quiet, staring out the window at the maintenance crews working in the darkness. During the delay, Sarah observed Marcus helping an elderly woman access the entertainment system on her seat, explaining it with patience she rarely saw in first-class passengers. When a young mother struggled with her crying infant a few rows ahead, he offered his own noise-canceling headphones to help soothe the baby. Finally, at 1:15 a.m., the captain announced they were ready for departure. As the plane began taxiing, Sarah noticed Marcus pull out a worn leather wallet and look at what appeared to be a photograph hidden inside. For a brief moment, his composed facade cracked, revealing a profound sadness that made Sarah's heart ache. The plane took off into the night sky, leaving the glittering lights of San Francisco behind. Sarah began the drink service, making her way methodically through the cabin. When she reached Marcus's seat, she found him absorbed in what looked like old text messages on his phone. "Another water, Mr. Reynolds?" she asked softly. He looked up, and this time his smile reached his eyes. "Sarah," he said, reading her name tag. "Water would be perfect, thank you. And please, call me Marcus." As she poured his water, turbulence shook the plane suddenly, causing some of the liquid to splash onto his phone. "I'm so sorry," Sarah exclaimed, quickly offering him a napkin. "No harm done," he said, helping her clean up the spill. Their hands brushed briefly, and Sarah noticed a wedding ring tan line on his finger, recent, by the looks of it. The turbulence grew stronger, and the captain's voice came over the intercom again. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some unexpected weather patterns. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts." Sarah secured the drink cart and made her way through the cabin, ensuring all passengers were properly belted. The plane shuddered and dipped, causing several passengers to gasp. As she passed Marcus's seat again, she saw him gripping the armrests tightly, his knuckles white. Without thinking, she paused and said quietly, "The A380 is designed to handle much worse than this. We'll be fine." He looked up at her gratefully, and for a moment, their eyes met. There was something in that brief exchange, a human connection that transcended their respective roles as passenger and flight attendant. Neither of them knew it yet, but this was just the beginning of a night that would change both their lives forever. As Sarah made her way to the crew jump seat, the plane continued to battle the increasingly stormy skies, heading into a night that would prove to be anything but ordinary. The turbulence grew increasingly violent as Flight 247 pushed through the dark skies above the Pacific. Red warning lights flashed through the cabin as the plane jerked and shuddered, causing oxygen masks to drop from their compartments. Sarah moved swiftly through the aisles, helping passengers secure their masks while maintaining her professional calm despite her own racing heart. "This is your captain speaking," the intercom crackled. "Due to severe weather conditions, we are being diverted to Anchorage International Airport. Please remain in your seats with your seatbelts fastened." Sarah caught Marcus looking at her with concern as she steadied herself against his seat during a particularly rough patch of turbulence. Instead of the panic she often saw in passengers' faces during emergencies, his expression showed genuine worry for her safety. "You should sit down," he said, gesturing to the empty seat beside him. "It's not safe to stand." Before Sarah could respond, another violent shake sent her stumbling. Marcus's quick reflexes caught her arm, preventing her from falling. She found herself in the seat next to him, both of them gripping their armrests as the plane descended through the storm. Lightning illuminated the cabin in bright flashes, revealing the scared faces of passengers around them. A young boy across the aisle began to cry, and without hesitation, Marcus reached into his carry-on bag and pulled out a small tablet. "Hey, buddy," he called out to the child. "Want to see something cool?" He pulled up a game on the tablet and handed it to the boy's mother, successfully distracting the child from the frightening situation. Sarah watched this interaction with growing curiosity. This was not the arrogant CEO she had expected based on media portrayals. As the plane continued its descent, they sat in companionable silence, occasionally exchanging glances when the turbulence intensified. The landing in Anchorage was rough but skillful. As the plane taxied to a stop, the captain announced that all flights were grounded due to the severe storm system. Additionally, a major technology conference in the city meant that all nearby hotels were fully booked. The terminal was chaos as hundreds of stranded passengers tried to find accommodation or make alternative travel arrangements. Sarah worked tirelessly with her crew to help manage the situation, distributing water and snacks to those who needed them. Hours passed, and the crowd in the terminal thinned as some passengers managed to find lodging or were picked up by local friends. Sarah's uniform jacket was wrinkled, her feet ached, but she continued helping those who remained. She noticed Marcus had stayed behind, not pulling rank or demanding special treatment like many other first-class passengers had. Instead, he was helping an elderly couple charge their phones, sharing his power bank and helping them contact their family. When he saw a mother struggling with 2 sleeping children and several bags, he quietly assisted her in creating a makeshift bed using his own jacket as a pillow. Around 3 a.m., most passengers had either found accommodation or settled into uncomfortable airport chairs for the night. Sarah sat down heavily on a bench, finally allowing herself to feel the exhaustion of the past several hours. "You look like you could use this," a voice said. She looked up to see Marcus holding out a cup of coffee from the only open cafe in the terminal. "Thank you," she said gratefully, accepting the warm drink. "You didn't have to stay, you know. I'm sure your assistant could have found you a room somewhere." Marcus sat down beside her, a tired smile on his face. "Sometimes life has other plans for us," he said, looking out at the storm still raging beyond the terminal windows. "Besides, I've spent enough nights in luxury hotels to know they don't always offer the most meaningful experiences." A comfortable silence fell between them as they watched the lightning illuminate the Alaskan sky. The airport's fluorescent lights cast a soft glow over the scattered sleeping passengers, creating an almost surreal atmosphere. "I noticed the ring mark," Sarah said quietly, surprising herself with her boldness. "Recent." Marcus twisted his bare finger unconsciously. "She passed away 6 months ago. Cancer." His voice was soft but steady. "Tonight was my first major business decision without her input. Maybe that's why it went so badly." Before Sarah could respond, a commotion arose from across the terminal. An elderly man had collapsed near the water fountain, and people were starting to gather around him. Sarah and Marcus exchanged quick glances before both jumping to their feet, running toward what would become the next chapter in their unexpected night. The elderly man's medical emergency had created a momentary chaos in the terminal, but thanks to Sarah's quick first aid response and Marcus's call to his doctor friend for guidance, the situation was now under control. The local paramedics had taken the passenger to the hospital, leaving Sarah and Marcus sitting in the now quiet airport cafe, both still processing the intensity of the past hour. "I didn't know flight attendants had such extensive medical training," Marcus said, warming his hands around his third cup of coffee. The storm continued to rage outside, making the terminal feel like a safe haven in the Alaskan night. Sarah smiled tiredly, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. There's a lot people don't know about us. Everyone thinks we just serve drinks and give safety demonstrations. She paused, taking a sip of her own coffee. But what about you? Most CEOs I've met wouldn't stick around a crowded airport helping strangers. Marcus's eyes seemed to drift to a distant place. Emma, my late wife, she always said success meant nothing if you couldn't use it to help others. He pulled out his wallet, carefully removing a slightly worn photograph. She was a pediatric oncologist. Even when she was sick herself, she kept working with her patients until she physically couldn't anymore. Sarah looked at the photo he offered. It showed a vibrant woman with kind eyes, surrounded by smiling children in a hospital playroom. She looks like she was amazing, Sarah said softly, handing the photo back. She was. Marcus carefully returned the photo to his wallet. Tonight's failed merger. It would have made our shareholders happy, but Emma would have hated it. The company we were trying to buy, they've been exploiting workers in developing countries. I couldn't go through with it. The confession hung in the air between them. Sarah found herself sharing her own story. My sister's in medical school right now, she said. Our parents passed away when we were young, and being a flight attendant helped me put her through college. People see the glamorous side of traveling, but really, I'm just trying to make sure she achieves her dreams. Marcus listened intently, his expression thoughtful. That's remarkable. How many years has she been in medical school? She's in her second year now, Sarah replied, pride evident in her voice. She wants to work in underserved communities, providing health care to people who can't afford it. Sometimes I pick up extra flights just to help with her textbook expenses. Outside, lightning flashed across the sky, followed by a low rumble of thunder. The few other passengers scattered around the terminal had fallen asleep, creating an intimate atmosphere in their corner of the cafe. You know, Marcus said, leaning forward slightly, I've spent years in boardrooms making billion-dollar decisions, but I've never felt as fulfilled as I did tonight, helping that elderly man with you. Sarah nodded understanding. It's different when you can see the direct impact of your actions on someone's life. She hesitated before continuing. I've had this dream for years, of starting a nonprofit that would help underprivileged children access education. Flying has shown me how many brilliant kids never get a chance simply because of where they were born. Marcus's eyes lit up with interest. Tell me more about this dream of yours. For the next hour, they talked about Sarah's vision, creating a program that would identify talented students in developing countries and provide them with educational opportunities. She spoke with growing animation about the children she'd met during her travels, the potential she saw in them, and the barriers they faced. Marcus listened, occasionally asking insightful questions that showed he was truly engaged. The business mogul facade had completely fallen away, replaced by genuine curiosity and enthusiasm. As the first hints of dawn began to lighten the sky outside, Sarah realized they had been talking for hours. I'm sorry, she said, suddenly self-conscious. I didn't mean to talk your ear off about my impossible dreams. Impossible? Marcus shook his head, a small smile playing at his lips. Sarah, I built my company from nothing because people told me my ideas were impossible. Sometimes the most impossible dreams are the ones most worth pursuing. Before he could continue, the airport's PA system crackled to life, announcing that flights would resume in 2 hours as the storm was finally clearing. Neither of them realized at that moment that their conversation had planted the seeds for something much bigger than either of them had imagined. As passengers began stirring in the terminal, preparing for their rescheduled flights, Sarah and Marcus remained in their quiet corner of the cafe. The morning light was now streaming through the large windows, casting long shadows across the floor. Their conversation had shifted to sharing stories from their vastly different lives, finding unexpected common ground in their experiences. So there I was, Sarah said, laughing softly, trying to serve drinks during heavy turbulence when this famous rock star decides to start an impromptu concert in first class. Everyone was singing along, completely ignoring the fasten seatbelt sign. Marcus grinned, then his expression turned more serious. You know, I've been thinking about what you said earlier about your nonprofit idea. Have you ever tried to get it off the ground? Sarah shook her head, absently stirring her cold coffee. I've written up some plans, but between my sister's medical school expenses and the practical realities of starting a foundation, it's remained just a dream. Show me, Marcus said suddenly, pulling out his tablet. Show me these plans of yours. Hesitantly, Sarah opened her email on her phone and forwarded him a document she worked on during countless lonely nights in hotel rooms. Marcus read through it carefully, his expression growing increasingly animated. This is actually quite impressive, he said, scrolling through the pages. You've thought about the logistics, the local partnerships, even the cultural considerations. It just needs some refinement in the financial and legal structure. Before Sarah could respond, her supervisor appeared at their table. Sarah, we need to start preparing for boarding. The Tokyo flight leaves in an hour. Of course, Sarah said, standing up quickly. She turned to Marcus, suddenly uncertain how to end their unusual night. Thank you for everything. Marcus stood as well, but instead of saying goodbye, he pulled out his business card. I want to help make this happen, he said firmly, handing her the card. Not just with funding, though I can certainly help there, but with my experience. This idea of yours, it's exactly what the world needs right now. Sarah stared at the card in her hand, emblazoned with the Reynolds Industries logo. I can't ask you to do that. You don't even know me. I know enough, Marcus replied. I know you've spent years supporting your sister's dreams while keeping your own on hold. I know you have the compassion and practical experience to make this work. And I know that after tonight, I can't just go back to making decisions purely for profit. A final boarding call echoed through the terminal. Sarah's supervisor called out to her again. Listen, Marcus continued quickly, take some time to think about it. In 2 weeks, I'll be in San Francisco for a technology conference. Meet me at my office. No pressure, just a proper discussion about how we could make this work. Sarah hesitated, her mind racing with possibilities and doubts. Why would you do this? Marcus's expression softened. Emma always said that life sends us signs if we're paying attention. Maybe being stranded in this airport wasn't just about avoiding a bad business deal. Maybe it was about finding a good one. Through the windows, they could see their plane being prepared for boarding. The storm had completely cleared, leaving behind a pristine Alaskan morning. 2 weeks, Marcus said. Just come and talk. If you decide it's not what you want, no harm done. Sarah looked at the business card again, then tucked it carefully into her uniform pocket. I'll think about it, she promised. As they walked toward the gate, maintaining their professional passenger-crew member dynamic, both felt the weight of the decision hanging between them. Sarah began her pre-flight duties, her mind spinning with possibilities she'd never dared to seriously consider before. Marcus settled into his first-class seat, watching as Sarah efficiently moved through the cabin, now back in her professional role. He pulled out his phone and made a quick call. Janet, clear my schedule for the afternoon 2 weeks from today, and get me everything you can find about setting up educational nonprofits. He paused, looking out at the morning sky. I think it's time Reynolds Industries started giving back in a meaningful way. As the plane took off, leaving Anchorage behind, both Sarah and Marcus knew that regardless of what happened next, their unexpected night in the airport had shifted something fundamental in both their lives. The real question was what they would choose to do with that shift. 2 weeks passed like a blur for Sarah. Between her regular flights and caring for her sister during a brief hospital stay for exhaustion, she had barely had time to process that fateful night in Alaska. Now she stood in front of the gleaming Reynolds Industries headquarters in downtown San Francisco, the business card Marcus had given her clutched tightly in her hand. The security guard examined her ID and checked a list. Ms. Chen, Mr. Reynolds is expecting you. Take the express elevator to the 45th floor. The elevator ride gave Sarah time to doubt herself again. She had changed her outfit 3 times that morning, finally settling on a simple navy blue dress that made her feel both professional and authentic. The doors opened directly into a sophisticated reception area where a woman in a crisp suit greeted her. Sarah Chen, I'm Janet, Marcus's executive assistant. He's just finishing up a video call. Please follow me. Instead of leading her to a formal conference room, Janet showed her to a casual sitting area with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the bay. A few minutes later, Marcus appeared, dressed more formally than in Alaska, but wearing the same kind smile. Sarah, He said warmly, "I'm glad you came." He gestured to a coffee station. "Still take it with one sugar." She was surprised he remembered such a small detail from their airport conversation. "Yes, thank you." As they settled into comfortable chairs, Marcus pulled out a familiar document. "I hope you don't mind, but I had our development team look over your proposal. They were impressed, particularly with your ideas about partnering with local schools." Sarah felt her cheeks warm. "You actually read through it all?" "Read it. I've been thinking about nothing else." Marcus leaned forward, his enthusiasm evident. "What you've outlined here, it's exactly what corporate philanthropy should be. Not just throwing money at problems, but creating sustainable solutions." He pulled out a tablet and showed her a presentation. "We've done some preliminary analysis. With the right structure and partnerships, we could start with pilot programs in 3 countries within 6 months." Sarah's heart raced as she looked at the detailed plans. Everything she had dreamed about was there, refined and expanded, but still true to her original vision. "There's just one condition," Marcus said, his tone growing serious. Sarah tensed, waiting for the catch. "You need to run it." She blinked in surprise. "What?" "This is your vision, Sarah. You understand both the practical challenges and the human element. We can provide the infrastructure, the funding, the legal framework, but it needs your heart." "But I'm not qualified to run a foundation," she protested. "I'm a flight attendant." Marcus shook his head. "You're someone who put her sister through medical school while working full-time. Who spent years observing different cultures and understanding their needs. Who can handle crisis situations with grace. I saw that firsthand." He paused. "Emma would have loved this idea, you know. She always said education was the key to breaking cycles of poverty." Sarah stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. "I would have to leave my job," she said quietly. "Yes," Marcus admitted. "But you'd be helping thousands of children access the kind of opportunities you fought so hard to give your sister." She turned back to face him. "Why are you really doing this? Truthfully?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. "That night in Alaska, I was at a crossroads. The merger falling through had made me question everything about how I've been running this company. Then I watched you. How you helped people without hesitation. How you had this brilliant dream but put others first." He stood up. "Maybe it's time for both of us to stop putting our real goals on hold." Sarah looked down at her hands, then back at the presentation outlining her dream made real. She thought about all the children she'd met during her travels, their bright eyes filled with potential but limited by circumstance. She thought about her sister, now thriving in medical school because someone had believed in her enough to sacrifice for her dreams. "If we do this," she said slowly, "I want to start with Southeast Asia. There's a village in Vietnam I visited last year. The children there are using outdated textbooks from the 1990s. Marcus broke into a genuine smile. "See? That's exactly why you need to run this. When can you start?" Sarah took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. Her next words would change not just her life, but potentially thousands of others. She looked at Marcus and made her decision. The next 3 months passed in a whirlwind of activity. Sarah had given notice at the airline, completed her final flights, and thrown herself into establishing the Reynolds Education Initiative. Her small temporary office on the 43rd floor of Reynolds Industries had become command central for their ambitious plans. Today was particularly significant, their first board meeting where Sarah would present the detailed implementation strategy. She stood in front of the mirror in her office bathroom, adjusting her blazer and trying to calm her nerves. "You look fine," came Marcus's voice from the doorway, "and the presentation is solid. Stop worrying." Sarah turned to face him, managing a small smile. "Easy for you to say. You've been doing this for years. Half the board members probably still think you've lost your mind, hiring a former flight attendant to run a multi-million-dollar foundation. Former flight attendant who speaks 4 languages, has contacts in 12 countries, and has already secured partnerships with 3 major international schools," Marcus corrected. "Besides, they trust my judgment." The boardroom was intimidating. All dark wood and leather chairs. Sarah took her place at the head of the table, facing the skeptical faces of Reynolds Industries' most senior executives. Her sister Lisa, now in her final year of medical school, had insisted on attending for moral support and sat quietly in the corner. "Good morning," Sarah began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. 3 months ago, Mr. Reynolds took a chance on an idea that education shouldn't be a privilege of geography or economics. Today, I'm going to show you how we're turning that idea into reality. For the next hour, Sarah presented their plan. She showed pictures of the schools they'd selected for their pilot program, explained their teacher training initiatives, and detailed their technology distribution strategy. With each slide, she could see the executives' expressions shifting from skepticism to interest. The key, she explained, pointing to a map, is that we're not just dropping resources into communities. We're building sustainable programs that can grow organically. Each school becomes a hub for the surrounding region. One of the older board members leaned forward. "This is all very admirable, Ms. Chen, but what's the measurable impact?" Sarah had been waiting for this question. She clicked to the next slide, showing detailed projections. Based on our pilot locations, we estimate reaching 5,000 students in the first year. By year 3, that number grows to 25,000. But the real impact is generational. These students will become teachers, doctors, engineers in their own communities. From the corner, Lisa spoke up unexpectedly. "If I may." And Marcus's nod, she stood. "I'm Sarah's sister, and I'm about to become a doctor because she believed education could change lives. She worked countless extra flights, lived in tiny apartments, gave up everything to make sure I could study. This isn't just a project for her, it's her life's mission." The room fell silent. Sarah felt tears threatening but maintained her professional composure. Marcus caught her eye and gave a subtle nod of encouragement. "The budget proposals are in your packets," Sarah continued, her voice stronger now. "We've already secured matching funds from 3 other major corporations, and we have letters of support from education ministers in all our target countries." The questions that followed were detailed and challenging, but Sarah handled each one with confidence born from months of preparation. When the last query had been answered, Marcus stood up. "Thank you, Sarah." He addressed the board. "I don't need to remind anyone that Reynolds Industries posted record profits last quarter. Now we have a chance to do something meaningful with those profits. The vote is called. All in favor?" Hands raised around the table, some quickly, others more slowly, but in the end, it was unanimous. After the board members filed out, Sarah remained in her chair, slightly dazed. Lisa hugged her tightly, whispering, "You did it," before leaving for her afternoon classes. Marcus sat down beside her. "You know what this means? We can start next month. Those kids in Vietnam you told me about, they're getting their new school first." Sarah finally let her professional facade crack, wiping away happy tears. "I still can't believe this is real. A year ago, I was serving drinks at 35,000 feet. And now you're changing lives at ground level," Marcus said. "We should celebrate. Dinner?" Sarah gathered her presentation's materials, smiling. "Actually, I need to call Vietnam. There's a principal there who's been waiting for this news." Marcus watched her hurry off to her office, thinking how Emma would have absolutely loved seeing this day. Sometimes the best business decisions weren't about business at all. 1 year had passed since the Reynolds Education Initiative launched its first program. Sarah stood in the dusty courtyard of their newest school in rural Vietnam, watching as students filed into their newly constructed classrooms. The morning sun cast long shadows across the playground where modern equipment had replaced the rusty structures she'd seen on her first visit. Inside one of the classrooms, a young girl named May was teaching her classmates how to use one of the tablets the foundation had provided. Sarah remembered her from her flight attendant days. The quiet child who had drawn pictures throughout the entire flight, using every scrap of paper she could find. "She's going to be a teacher," said Mrs. Nguyen, the school's principal, coming to stand beside Sarah. Before your program, she talked about working in the rice fields like her parents. Now she dreams of university. Sarah's phone buzzed with a message from Marcus. "Board meeting in 30 minutes. Ready for your video update?" She smiled, remembering how these virtual meetings have become a monthly tradition. Finding a quiet spot in the school's new computer lab, Sarah connected to the video call. The familiar faces of the Reynolds Industries board appeared on screen, with Marcus at the center. "Good morning from Vietnam," Sarah began, turning her camera to show the view outside. "I'm at our 10th school location, and I have some amazing progress to report." She shared the latest statistics. Literacy rates had improved by 40% in their pilot locations, student retention had increased by 65%, and their first batch of scholarship students were preparing for university entrance exams. But numbers don't tell the whole story, Sarah continued, her voice full of emotion. Yesterday, I watched a girl teach quantum physics concepts to her classmates using one of our interactive programs. Her father is a fisherman who never finished primary school. This is the generational change we talked about a year ago. After the meeting, Sarah walked through the village with Mrs. Ndyan. Children called out greetings, and parents smiled and waved. A year ago, she had been a stranger here. Now, she was part of the community. Her phone rang again. This time it was Lisa. Sis? Guess what? I just got my residency assignment. I'm going to be working at the Children's Hospital near your Vietnam location. Sarah stopped walking, joy spreading through her chest. Really? But I thought you were set on Boston. Well, Lisa said, someone taught me that we should use our education to help others. Besides, the hospital here is partnering with the Foundation for Medical Outreach Programs. Speaking of which, is Marcus still coming next week for the medical center inauguration? Yes, he's bringing the new board members to see the projects firsthand. Sarah paused, watching a group of students playing soccer on the new sports field. It's strange to think this all started because of a delayed flight and a storm. After finishing her call with Lisa, Sarah spent the afternoon observing classes. In the computer lab, she watched students video conferencing with their partner school in San Francisco, another program that had exceeded their expectations. Children who had never left their village were now having daily conversations with peers across the globe. As the sun began to set, Sarah sat in the school's library, a room that had been an empty shell a year ago and was now filled with books, computers, and the steady hum of learning. She opened her laptop to write her daily report and found an email from Marcus. Sarah, just finished reviewing the expansion proposals. The board has approved funding for 15 new locations next year. Emma's old hospital wants to partner with us for the medical education program. Everything you dreamed about that night in the airport is becoming reality. See you next week. Marcus. Sarah looked around the library, thinking about how far they'd come. On her desk sat a framed photo from the Foundation's launch. Her and Marcus cutting the ribbon at their first school. Next to it was a newer picture of May winning the regional science competition. Her phone chimed with one last message for the day, this time from Mrs. Nguyen. The parents want to know if you'll join them for the Harvest Festival next month. They say you're family now. Sarah typed a quick yes, then leaned back in her chair, feeling a deep sense of contentment. From flight attendant to education pioneer, her journey had been unexpected but perfect. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now, she allowed herself to simply appreciate how one stormy night had changed not just her life, but thousands of others. 3 years had passed since that fateful night in Anchorage. Sarah stood at the podium of the United Nations Educational Summit in New York. In the front row, Marcus sat beside Lisa, who had just finished her medical residency and was now running the Foundation's healthcare education program in Southeast Asia. Mai, their first scholarship student, was also there, now a poised teenager preparing to start university in San Francisco. Education, Sarah began, her voice clear and confident, is not just about buildings and books. It's about believing in possibilities. 3 years ago, I was a flight attendant with a dream. Today, I stand before you representing 50,000 students in 15 countries who are living their own dreams. She clicked through slides showing their schools, their students, their success stories. There was the boy from rural Thailand who had won an international mathematics competition. The girl from Vietnam who had developed a mobile app to help local farmers. The village in Indonesia where every single graduate from their first class had gone on to higher education. But our greatest achievement isn't in the numbers, Sarah continued. It's in the change we see in communities. Parents who never finished school are now attending adult education classes. Former students are returning as teachers. Local businesses are growing because of increased literacy and technological skills. After her speech, at the reception, Marcus approached her with an elderly gentleman. Sarah, meet Mr. Chen. No relation. Marcus smiled. He's interested in implementing our model across his educational foundation in China. As Sarah discussed potential partnerships with Mr. Chen, she caught glimpses of other changes around her. Lisa was showing Mai around, introducing her to university professors who were eager to meet the young student whose science project had made international news. Mrs. Nguyen, now the regional director for their Asian programs, was deep in conversation with education ministers from several countries. Later that evening, Sarah and Marcus found a quiet moment on the terrace overlooking the New York skyline. "Did you ever imagine this?" she asked, gesturing to the event inside. "That night in Alaska?" Marcus shook his head, smiling. "I was just trying to avoid a bad merger. You were the one with the real vision." He paused, pulling out his wallet and the now worn photo of Emma. She would have loved all of this, especially the medical programs Lisa's running. "The Emma Reynolds Medical Scholarship has already put 50 students through medical school," Sarah reminded him. "That's 50 new doctors who will serve in communities that never had health care before." Their conversation was interrupted by Mai, who rushed out excitedly. "Ms. Sarah, 3 universities have offered me full scholarships, and they want to partner with the foundation to offer more spots to our students." After May left, Marcus turned to Sarah. "You know, Reynolds Industries' profits have actually increased since we started the foundation. Turns out doing good is good for business." "Speaking of business," Sarah said, "wait until you see the proposals from our students in Cambodia. They're developing sustainable business models for their communities. One group has already launched a successful ecotourism project." The evening wound down, but the impact of their work continued. Across different time zones, their schools were coming alive with morning classes. Children were logging into their computers, opening new books, and dreaming bigger dreams than they had ever thought possible. As Sarah prepared to leave, she found a note from Lisa. "Sis, remember when you used to work extra flights just to help pay for my textbooks? Now we're helping thousands of students get their own textbooks. Mom and Dad would be so proud." Sarah tucked the note into her planner, next to a photograph of their first school's opening day. The nervous flight attendant from 3 years ago would never have imagined standing at the UN, but then again, she never imagined that a delayed flight could lead to all of this. Marcus joined her for the ride to the airport. She was flying out to visit their newest school location in Africa, while they had board meetings back in San Francisco. As they passed through Times Square, they saw a massive billboard displaying the foundation's latest campaign. "Education changes everything." "You know what the best part is?" Sarah said softly. "Every time I visit one of our schools, I see another version of my sister, another version of Mai, another child who just needs someone to believe in them." Marcus nodded, understanding perfectly. Sometimes the best journeys start with a delayed flight. Sarah smiled, knowing that their journey was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning.